When Doris Roberts passed away in 2016, her longtime home in the quiet neighborhood of Brentwood, Los Angeles, was quietly listed for sale. It was a dignified two-story Spanish-style villa, partially hidden behind ivy-covered walls, tall hedges, and a heavy wooden gate. The house had stood since the 1920s, steeped in old Hollywood charm with iron-wrought balconies, sun-drenched courtyards, and a stone fountain that never seemed to dry up even during droughts. The house was purchased 3 years later by a couple from San Francisco, Elliot and Mara Hastings, both in their late 30s. Elliot was a venture capitalist working in tech, practical and data-driven. Mara was a freelance photographer who loved vintage aesthetics, enamored with the history embedded in the architecture. They bought the house precisely because of its old Hollywood legacy, which Mara found endlessly romantic. At first, nothing seemed unusual. They spent months remodeling carefully, preserving much of the original woodwork, the intricate ceiling moldings, and even the vintage chandeliers. Mara converted one of the sunlit upstairs rooms, which had once been Doris' private study, into her darkroom for developing film. The first unsettling experience happened in that very room. Mara often worked late, developing photos in the dim red glow of the safe light. One night, as she stood rinsing prints in a water tray, she swore she heard soft footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting Elliot, but no one was there. She shrugged it off, but then came a faint smell of a floral perfume, something heavy and old-fashioned that neither of them used. Over the following weeks, the smell persisted, always strongest near the darkroom. One evening, while sorting old negatives, Mara glanced up to see a figure reflected in the windowpane, a woman in a long robe or dressing gown, silver-haired, standing perfectly still just outside the room. When she whipped around, the hallway was empty. Mara kept it to herself for a while, thinking her mind was playing tricks. But then Elliot, who never believed in anything supernatural, mentioned hearing murmured conversations at night, as if an old radio was playing faintly somewhere in the walls. He even tore open a section behind their bedroom headboard, expecting to find faulty wiring or an old intercom system, but found nothing. They began to argue more, both blaming stress and fatigue. Mara became distant, spending hours in the garden courtyard that Doris once adored. There, she felt a strange peace, as if someone was watching protectively. The air in that space was different, warmer still. Then came the most defining incident. One night, Elliot was working on his laptop downstairs in the library when a framed photo fell from the shelf and shattered. It was a picture of Doris with Ray Romano and the Everybody Loves Raymond cast left behind by accident during the sale. As he picked it up, Elliot heard a clear, scolding voice say, "Be careful with that." He spun around. No one. The next morning, Elliot confessed everything to Mara, who broke down and admitted her own experiences. That evening, they both stayed up in the library, cameras ready, phones charged, determined to catch whatever was happening. Around midnight, the house seemed to sigh, the creaking of floors, shifting of wood as though someone were pacing in slippers. Then, as both sat frozen, the old stereo system, one they'd never used, powered on by itself, playing soft classical music. And they heard it again. A woman's voice, clear but gentle, saying, "This is my house. Don't change too much." They sold the home 6 months later, unable to shake the persistent sensation of being watched, not with hostility, but with proprietorship. The real estate agent didn't ask questions when they left certain vintage elements untouched per the new owner's instructions. Today, the house remains occupied, but it's said that neighbors still see the faint outline of a woman in a flowing robe tending to the courtyard garden at dusk, always vanishing when approached. Those who knew Doris Roberts swear she would never have left a home she loved so dearly, even in death. And Mara? She never developed another photo in a darkroom again. They left the house in a hurry, not selling immediately, not even packing everything at once. A week after the stereo incident, Mara refused to sleep there, and Elliot stayed behind only to coordinate with the movers. For a few nights, he camped out in the guest room downstairs, reluctant to walk the broad staircase alone after dark. Those nights were the worst. The house, usually still, began to groan as if every timber and floorboard remembered the weight of someone else's footsteps. At first, it was subtle like distant footsteps above his head as he lay in bed, the ceiling fan casting slow shadows that swayed across the walls. He told himself it was the house settling, but then he started to hear things clearer. Soft humming, the kind of wordless melody a woman might hum while cooking or folding laundry. It always came from the kitchen. On the third night, shortly after midnight, Elliot crept down the hall with a flashlight. The heavy wood floors sighed beneath his steps, each sound magnified in the emptiness of the house. The kitchen was dark, save for the faint blue glow from the refrigerator's water dispenser. But the humming, it was clearer here, as though someone stood right by the stove. Elliot stood still, not daring to breathe, his eyes adjusting to the dark. The smell of something floral, the same scent Mara had described, was thick in the air, accompanied by the faintest scent of something cooking, like onions simmering in butter. But there was no one there. The old rotary wall phone next to the kitchen pantry suddenly gave a single shrill ring, not a full call, just a solitary note that sliced through the silence. He bolted back to the guest room, slamming the door behind him, his heart pounding against his ribs like it was trying to escape. He didn't sleep that night, and by morning he decided to call Mara, telling her she was right, they had to leave for good. But something changed after that night. Elliot started dreaming of the house, even while staying in their rented apartment downtown. His dreams were vivid, sun-washed images of the Brentwood villa, just as it must have looked in the 1960s. He dreamed of Doris Roberts herself, or at least a version of her, younger, laughing at cocktail parties in the courtyard, her voice carrying easily over the clink of ice in glasses. Sometimes in the dream, she would catch sight of him and stare directly at him, the smile slipping from her face, her eyes suddenly weighty, stern. She would say things like, "You don't belong here," or worse, "Why did you leave me alone?" He would wake drenched in sweat, the floral scent clinging faintly to the sheets. Meanwhile, Mara, though relieved to have left, found herself drawn to old photographs of the house. She'd downloaded several images from real estate listings, shots of the stucco walls, the terracotta roof tiles, the arched doorways. She didn't know why, but looking at them made her feel watched, almost guilty. Then one afternoon, while developing some client work in her temporary studio, an image began to emerge on the paper that she didn't remember taking a shot of the Brentwood house's courtyard at sunset. She hadn't photographed it. She was sure of that. And yet, there it was. At the center of the frame, sitting on the stone edge of the fountain, was the faint, translucent outline of a woman in a long dressing gown, her hair in soft curls. She wasn't looking at the camera but slightly past it, her face half-turned, as though aware of someone watching her from the shadows. Mara dropped the print and backed away, her breath short. She tried to show Elliot that evening, but when she retrieved the print, the image had changed, the figure was gone. Only the empty courtyard remained, glowing orange from the setting sun. Still, Mara swore she saw her. Neither of them spoke of it again, not directly, but both understood that they hadn't escaped the house as cleanly as they hoped. Something of it or of her had followed them, a lingering thread between them and that ivy-covered gate. They avoided driving through Brentwood altogether, but sometimes, late at night, Mara would find herself browsing satellite maps, tracing the neighborhood streets, always stopping just shy of their old address, as though she was afraid of what she might see if she zoomed in too close. And in that empty house, behind the wrought iron balcony, a faint light sometimes glows in the second-story window, the room that used to be Doris Roberts' study. The neighbors say the house is empty, waiting on another buyer. But when the wind is still, some claim they can hear a woman humming. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Elliot began to notice at first the dreams weren't just dreams anymore. Even in the bright, sterile light of their downtown apartment, there were moments when he'd glance toward a window or into the far corner of a room and feel that sensation again. That someone was standing just outside his vision, watching. Once, as he brushed his teeth late at night, the steam from the shower still clinging to the mirror, he caught a shape in the fogged glass. It was the faint silhouette of a woman standing behind him, not close, not touching, but observing. She didn't move. Elliot spun around, mouth foaming, his pulse hammering, but the bathroom was empty, the door ajar, the hallway dark and still. For a long minute, he stood there, panting, watching the condensation slowly drip away, until even the shape was gone. He didn't tell Mara. She was quieter now, distracted. She'd stopped taking photos for her clients. The cameras gathered dust. The darkroom equipment left packed in boxes they never opened. She spent hours just sitting on their balcony, staring across the skyline, sometimes murmuring to herself, as if holding a conversation he couldn't hear. Then there was the smell. That perfume, sweet but overpowering. A kind of heavy, old-fashioned scent that didn't belong in their modern apartment. It appeared now even in the mornings, clinging to their clothes, their sheets, their hair. One afternoon, as Elliot scrolled idly on his phone, a listing caught his attention. A real estate site. The Brentwood house was back on the market. It hadn't sold after they'd left, but the photos in the new listing were different. The angles were familiar, yet somehow wrong, a little off-center, the lighting colder, less inviting. And then there was one photo of the upstairs study, the very room that had been Mara's darkroom, where, just barely, if you zoomed in, there appeared to be a figure reflected in the glass of the French doors. A woman, hair curled, wearing what looked like a robe. Elliot's stomach turned. He stared at the image for long minutes, his mind spinning through rational explanations, camera artifacts, tricks of the light. But in his gut, he knew. He showed Mara. She didn't say a word. She stared at the screen, her eyes distant, and then quietly stood and walked into the bedroom, shutting the door. She stayed in there for hours. That night, Mara woke up crying. Not loudly. Not like she was sobbing, but tears streamed from her eyes even as she slept. Her face slack, her breath shallow. Elliot shook her gently, whispering her name, and she woke suddenly with a gasp, eyes wide, heart racing. "I saw her," Mara whispered hoarsely. "I was there again, in the courtyard." Elliot pressed her for more, but she shook her head, curling into herself. Later, when she was calmer, she told him. She said I wasn't supposed to leave, that the house wasn't done with me. Her words hung heavy between them. They didn't sleep after that, watching the pale blue light of the morning creep through the blinds. In the days that followed, Elliot started hearing the humming again, not in dreams, not in distant memory, but right there, in the apartment. Always when the city noise dipped low, usually just before dawn. A soft, steady melody, barely audible, like someone humming to themselves while tidying up, maybe setting a table. One morning, just before the sun broke the horizon, Elliot stood in the kitchen pouring coffee when he heard it again, clearer than ever, just behind him. When he turned, there for the briefest moment he saw her. The same woman, hair silvery, set in waves. She wore a robe tied loosely at her waist, her expression stern but sad. She watched him with deep, knowing eyes, and then like smoke she was gone. The coffee spilled across the counter, and Elliot just stood there, hand trembling, heart thudding so hard he thought it would rupture. He knew now that they hadn't really left the house. Somehow, some thread bound them still, as though when they stepped beyond that ivy-covered gate, they had carried something with them, or perhaps something had followed. And Mara was changing. She seemed distracted, fading into herself. Sometimes, Elliot would catch her standing perfectly still in the living room, staring at nothing, lips moving faintly. When he asked her what she was saying, she would just smile faintly and whisper, "She's teaching me the melody." Elliot didn't know what to do anymore. But he knew one thing for certain. If they didn't go back to the Brentwood house, whatever they'd left unfinished there would come for them in ways neither of them could outrun. And he wasn't sure if Mara wanted to outrun it at all. Elliot couldn't ignore it anymore. The signs were everywhere. Mara's eyes had changed. The brightness, the curiosity that had first drawn him to her, seemed dulled, like a light gradually dimming under a heavy cloth. She spoke less, but when she did, her voice carried that odd lilt, like she was repeating words whispered in her ear. One morning, before sunrise, Elliot woke to find her side of the bed cold and empty. He found her standing on the balcony, barefoot, wrapped in her robe, though the air was sharp and cool. She was humming the same old melody. "What are you doing out here?" Elliot whispered, touching her shoulder. She turned slowly, her face pale in the moonlight, her eyes glassy and distant. "She's waiting for me," Mara said softly. "She wants me to come home." "Home? What are you talking about? This is our home." Mara smiled faintly, shaking her head. "No, Elliot. She means her home. The house." He stood there, chilled not by the morning air but by the realization that he was losing her not to madness, but to something else, something tethered between the walls of that Brentwood villa. A week later, Elliot made the decision. He booked a return trip to the house. He didn't ask Mara if she wanted to go, she seemed to already know. She packed her things slowly, reverently, folding clothes as though they were going on a long, important journey rather than just a drive across the city. They arrived in Brentwood under a gray sky. The neighborhood looked smaller, more confined, the hedges taller than Elliot remembered, the air dense with the smell of wet earth. The house stood just as they'd left it, its facade aged, the wrought iron gate slightly ajar as if expecting them. The realtor had given them access. The house was still unsold. The market reluctant to touch it after several potential buyers backed away with vague explanations. As they pushed open the heavy front door, the smell hit them instantly. Not dust, not mildew, but that same unmistakable floral perfume, warm and clinging, as though it had been waiting. The house was cold, despite the season. The hardwood floors groaned beneath their steps, the chandeliers above swaying gently even though there was no draft. Mara walked ahead without hesitation. She moved like she knew the house better than she should, as though she had lived there all her life. She climbed the staircase, one hand brushing along the carved wooden railing. Elliot followed, his throat dry, his heart hammering like a warning drum. She paused before the old study, the room that had been her darkroom, the room Doris Roberts had once used as her writing retreat. The door was slightly ajar. Mara pushed it open. The room was just as empty as when they'd left, dust motes hanging in shafts of pale light, the faint outlines on the floor where furniture once stood. But the air was alive, vibrating faintly, as though filled with static electricity. And then, the sound soft at first, then clearer, the melody. A woman's voice humming. It was coming from the corner of the room. Elliot stared, breathless. As the air shimmered, the outlines of someone taking form. A woman older, but not frail. Hair silver, curled perfectly, a dressing gown cinched at her waist. She was sitting in a chair that wasn't there anymore, smiling faintly at Mara. "I knew you'd come back," the figure whispered. Mara stepped forward, her face serene, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm sorry I left," she whispered back. Elliot tried to speak, tried to pull Mara back, but his voice caught in his throat. The air was too thick, his limbs too heavy. He watched helplessly as Mara knelt before the figure, who now looked at Elliot directly for the first time. Her eyes were sharp, not angry, not malicious, but commanding. "She belongs here now," Doris said softly. "She listens. She sees." Mara turned to Elliot, her expression calm, peaceful even. "I can't leave her alone, Elliot. I can't." Her voice was hers, but layered beneath was another tone, as though someone else was speaking through her. And with that, the room grew colder. The light shifted, darker, grayer. Elliot felt himself being pushed back, an invisible force pressing against his chest, his lungs tightening. He stumbled into the hallway, gasping, the door to the study closing slowly, not slammed, but with a soft, definite click. He pounded on it, shouted for Mara, but there was no reply. No footsteps, no voices, only the soft, persistent hum of the melody. When Elliot finally pushed the door open, the room was empty. No Mara, no woman in the robe, only dust, the faint scent of perfume, and a photograph lying on the floor, one they had never seen before. It was a black and white picture of the courtyard. And there, sitting side by side on the fountain's edge, were Doris Roberts and Mara, both smiling faintly, as though they had been friends for years. Elliot left the house that evening. He never returned. The Brentwood villa remains unsold. The neighbors still say lights come on at night. A woman's humming drifts from the study window, And sometimes if the garden gate creaks open just right, you can hear two voices in the courtyard, laughing softly beneath the sound of running water. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.